Sometimes life hands you one last chance when you least expect it. For Neil Garrison, a 58-year-old widower barely holding things together, that chance came in the form of a rusted yacht he inherited from an uncle he hardly knew. The boat sat abandoned in a remote coastal inlet, covered in vines and decay. Neil and his daughter Bridget went to clear it out, hoping to salvage something, anything. What they found changed everything. Hidden beneath the galley floor was $15 million in Cold War treasure, artwork, gold bars, and journals from a smuggler's past. But the real discovery wasn't the fortune. It was what happened between father and daughter as they uncovered secrets that had been buried for decades. Would this inheritance finally bring them together or push them further apart? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Neil Garrison's hands smelled like motor oil and sawdust, a combination he'd grown used to over the past 3 years. At 58, he worked 2 jobs. Days at Harborview Hardware on the Oregon coast, nights loading trucks at a distribution warehouse 10 miles inland. The work kept him busy, kept his mind from wandering into places he couldn't afford to go. Busy meant surviving. Busy meant he didn't have to sit alone in his apartment and count all the ways his life had fallen apart. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms in a complex that had seen better decades. Rent was manageable, which mattered more than aesthetics. He kept Lorraine's things in the 2nd bedroom, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her books stacked on the nightstand, her reading glasses folded on top of a mystery novel she'd never finished. 3 years since cancer had taken her, and he still couldn't bring himself to pack any of it away. Sometimes he stood in the doorway of that room and tried to remember what her voice sounded like. The memory was fading, edges going soft like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Lorraine had been his compass, steady, practical, warm in ways that balanced his tendency towards silence. She'd known how to talk to their daughter, how to bridge the gap between Neil's quiet nature and Bridget's need for connection. After Lorraine died, that bridge collapsed. Neil tried. God knows he tried, but every conversation with Bridget felt like walking through a minefield. He said the wrong things, or worse, said nothing at all. She'd call and he'd freeze, unsure how to be the parent she needed. Eventually the calls became less frequent. Text messages replaced phone conversations. Then even those dwindled to holiday greetings and the occasional thinking of you. Bridget was 30 now, living in Portland, working in marketing for some tech company he couldn't quite understand. She'd mentioned getting engaged last Christmas, showed him a photo of the ring over FaceTime. The man's name was Preston, clean-cut, successful, the kind of son-in-law any father would be proud to have. Neil had never met him. Bridget said they'd arrange dinner soon, but soon had a way of never arriving. He told himself she was busy, that young people had full lives. But late at night, loading boxes onto conveyor belts, he knew the truth. She was avoiding him. He'd become someone she felt obligated to check in on, rather than someone she wanted to talk to. The inheritance letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September. Neil found it in his mailbox between a past-due electric bill and a coupon for an oil change. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a law firm's return address embossed in the corner. His first thought was that he was being sued, maybe something from the warehouse, a workers' comp claim gone wrong. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. The letter was formal, written in language that took him 3 read-throughs to fully grasp. An attorney named Pruitt explained that Neil's uncle, Desmond Garrison, had passed away, though apparently this had happened decades ago. In 1979, the estate had been tied up in probate complications, but those had finally been resolved. As Desmond's only living blood relative, Neil was inheriting his uncle's primary asset, a yacht called Meridian's Call, currently docked, or more accurately run aground, at Crescent Inlet, approximately 60 miles down the coast. Neil sat on his apartment steps, reading the letter twice more. Uncle Desmond. He had vague childhood memories of the man, tall, weathered, smelling of salt and tobacco. Desmond would visit maybe once a year when Neil was young, arriving with exotic gifts, carved figurines from the Philippines, silk scarves from Turkey, strange coins from countries Neil couldn't pronounce. His father, Robert, had always been tense during these visits. The brothers would drink coffee in strained silence while Neil played in the other room, pretending not to notice the way the air got thick with things unsaid. Then the visit stopped. Neil must have been 10 or 11. He'd asked his father about it once, and Robert had simply said, "Desmond made his choices." That was the end of it. Neil's father died when Neil was 25, never mentioning his brother again. Neil had assumed Desmond was long dead too, but apparently the man had owned a yacht. And now that yacht belonged to Neil. His first instinct was to ignore it. What did he know about boats? What would he do with a yacht, especially one that had been abandoned for over 40 years? The letter mentioned the vessel was in distressed condition and would require significant investment to restore or remove. Translation, it was a rotting hulk that would cost more to deal with than it was worth. Still, something about it nagged at him. That night at the warehouse, stacking boxes in the fluorescent glare, Neil kept thinking about Desmond. About the gifts, the stories of distant places, the way his uncle had seemed to carry the whole world in his smile. What had happened to make a man like that disappear? Why had he and Neil's father stopped speaking? And more pressingly, why was Neil standing in a warehouse at 2 in the morning, exhausted and alone, when somewhere down the coast there was a piece of family history waiting? He made the decision around 3 a.m., in that strange, clear-headed space that comes from extreme fatigue. He'd call Bridget, tell her about the yacht, maybe suggest they drive down together, take a look, see if there was anything worth salvaging. At worst, they'd spend a day together. At best, well, he didn't let himself hope for best-case scenarios anymore. The next morning, after 4 hours of restless sleep, Neil dialed Bridget's number. It rang 5 times before she answered, her voice cautious. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I'm fine," he said quickly, then realized how rarely he called that she'd immediately assume emergency. I got some strange news. About your great-uncle Desmond." There was a pause. "I don't think I know who that is." "My dad's brother. You wouldn't remember him. He died before you were born. Apparently he left me a yacht." Another pause, longer this time. "A yacht? It's complicated. It's been sitting somewhere for 40 years, probably falling apart. But I thought maybe we could drive down and take a look. This weekend, if you're free." He braced himself for the excuses. She was busy. Preston had plans. She'd let him know. Instead, she said, "Actually, that sounds good. I could use a break from everything here." Neil's heart did something unexpected. It lifted. Just slightly, but enough to notice. "Really?" "Yeah, text me the details. I'll drive down Saturday morning." After they hung up, Neil stood in his small kitchen, holding the phone like it might evaporate. For the first time in 3 years, he and his daughter had plans. Real plans, not obligations or forced holiday meals, but something they'd chosen together. He looked at Lorraine's wedding ring, which he wore on a chain around his neck. Gold band, simple, worn smooth from years of wear. He touched it gently. "I'm trying," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm really trying." Outside, morning light spread across the Oregon coast, and somewhere 60 miles south, a forgotten yacht waited in its bed of vines and rust, keeping secrets that would change everything. The drive to Crescent Inlet took just over an hour, most of it spent in careful silence. Neil kept both hands on the wheel of his truck, Bridget in the passenger seat, with her phone face down on her lap, a small gesture he noticed and appreciated. They'd agreed to take his vehicle since the attorney's directions warned of rough terrain near the inlet. For the first 20 miles, they stuck to safe topics. The weather, road construction, a deer they spotted near the highway. But gradually, as the coastal route wound through stands of Douglas fir and the ocean appeared in glimpses between hillsides, the conversation found steadier ground. "Mom used to love this drive," Bridget said, looking out the window. "Remember when we'd go to Cannon Beach every summer?" Neil's hands tightened on the wheel, then deliberately relaxed. "She'd make us stop at every scenic viewpoint. Took us 5 hours to go 90 miles. She wanted to see everything. Bridget's voice carried something fragile. Didn't want to miss anything. They let that sit between them. The unspoken truth that Lorraine had been taken before she was ready, that there were thousands of viewpoints she'd never see now. Neil wanted to say something profound, something that would honor his wife's memory and comfort his daughter, but the words tangled in his throat the way they always did. Instead, he said she'd be excited about this. Your mother loved a mystery. Bridget smiled, and it reached her eyes. She really would. Remember how she'd drag us to every estate sale, convinced she'd find some priceless antique? Never did, Neil said. But she enjoyed looking. That was the point, Dad. The looking was the fun part. The GPS directed them off the main highway onto progressively smaller roads. Pavement gave way to gravel, then to something barely more than packed dirt with grass growing down the center. The forest pressed close on both sides, cedar and spruce filtering the morning light into green shadows. You sure we're going the right way? Bridget asked, bracing herself as the truck bounced over a pothole. According to this, the inlet's just ahead. Neil checked the printed directions Pruitt's office had provided. Technology was fine, but he trusted paper. The trees opened suddenly onto a small bay, horseshoe-shaped and sheltered from the main ocean by a rocky breakwater. The water was slate-gray, mirror-smooth in the protected cove. And there, run aground near the far shore like a beached whale, was the Meridian's call. Neil stopped the truck. Both of them stared. "Oh," Bridget breathed. The yacht was bigger than Neil had imagined, 65 feet at least, maybe more. It sat tilted slightly to port, the hull resting on a muddy bank where high tide had abandoned it years ago. Vines climbed the sides like invasive surgery, morning glory and blackberry creating a living shroud. The once white paint had grayed to the color of old bones, streaked with rust and weather. Windows were broken or missing entirely. One of the masts had fallen, lying across the forward deck like a broken arm. But underneath the decay, you could see what it had been. The lines of the hull were elegant, classic. Teak wood showed through in patches where the vines hadn't reached. Brass fixtures, green with oxidation, still hinted at former luxury. This had been a gentleman's yacht, built in an era when such things were crafted by hand, when sailing was as much about grace as getting somewhere. "It's beautiful," Bridget said. Neil looked at his daughter, surprised. "It's a wreck." "It's both." She was already opening her door. "Come on." They approached carefully, testing the ground with each step. The mud near the hull was soft, but not treacherous. Someone had laid down planks at some point. Grey, weathered, but still solid enough to bear weight. The planks led to a makeshift gangway, really just a wide board propped against the deck rail. A voice called out before they could board. "You'd be the Garrison nephew, I expect." An old man emerged from a shed Neil hadn't noticed, tucked back in the tree line. He was 70 at least, maybe 80, weathered in the way of people who'd spent their lives near salt water. He wore canvas work pants and a flannel shirt, moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints complained but still worked. "I'm Neil Garrison. This is my daughter, Bridget. Silas Croft, harbour master, more or less. Kept an eye on the Meridian for going on 40 years now." He offered a calloused hand. "Your uncle was an interesting man. You knew Desmond?" "Well, as anyone did, I suppose." "Which wasn't very well." Silas studied the yacht with an expression that might have been fondness or might have been something else. He kept to himself. "Lot of secrets, your uncle. Came and went at strange hours. Always paid in cash. What was he doing out here?" Bridget asked. Silas's eyes shifted to her, assessing. "Sailing officially. But Desmond Garrison wasn't just some rich man with a hobby. Had boats been places. Seen things." He paused. "He died in 79, you know. Illness took him fast. One day he was fine, next month he was gone. Left instructions with the county that if any family ever came looking, they should have access. But nobody came. Till now." Neil absorbed this.
"Did he say anything?"
"About why he was leaving the yacht. Just that it wasn't his to sell. Said it held something important." Silas smiled, thin and cryptic. "Said the right person would know what to do with it." The old man gestured toward the gangway. "She's safe enough to board, long as you watch your step." Planking sound on the main deck. I've kept the worst of the weather out, best I could. Not sure why, just seemed wrong to let her rot completely. Neil and Bridget exchanged glances. His daughter's eyes held something he recognized from when she was young, that bright, eager curiosity that Lorraine had nurtured and he'd always envied. When had he stopped seeing that look? When had she stopped showing it to him? "Let's take a look," he said. The gangway creaked but held. Neil went first, testing each step, then helped Bridget up behind him. Silas remained on shore, watching with those unreadable eyes. The deck was more solid than it looked, though Neil still moved carefully. Decades of leaves and pine needles had created a carpet of decomposition. Moss grew in the seams between planks, but the underlying structure felt sound. Desmond had built or bought well. The main cabin door hung open, swollen in its frame. Neil pushed it wider. Light spilled into what had once been a luxurious salon. Built-in benches lined the walls, upholstered in material that might have been red once, but had faded to uncertain pink. A table was bolted to the floor, its wood surface warped but intact. Shelves held books, their spines swollen with moisture, titles illegible. "Look at this," Bridget said, moving to the navigation station. Maps still hung on the wall, though they'd become abstract art. Continents bleeding into oceans, legends faded to ghosts. She touched a brass compass mounted in gimbals. Despite the corrosion, it still moved freely. "This stuff is from the 60s. Original equipment." Neil opened a drawer beneath the chart table. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were papers. He lifted them carefully. Ship's registration dated 1963, listing Desmond Garrison as owner. Purchase receipt from a Seattle shipyard. Insurance documents expired decades ago. "He bought this new," Neil said, studying the registration. $40,000. That was real money in 1963. Where did a guy like Uncle Desmond get that kind of money? Bridget was photographing everything with her phone, her marketing instincts engaged. "No idea. Dad never talked about it." Neil set the papers on the table. "But according to this, he owned the Meridian outright. No loan, no lien. Paid cash." They moved through the yacht systematically. 2 small sleeping cabins aft, the bedding long ago claimed by mildew and mice. Ahead, boat terminology for bathroom, with fixtures surprisingly intact. And forward, past the salon, a compact galley. The kitchen was a time capsule. Copper pots hung from overhead racks. A gimbaled stove stood ready, though Neil wouldn't trust the gas lines after 40 years. Cabinets held dishes, glasses, even sealed jars of spices that had turned to powder. Someone had lived here, recently enough that it felt almost like trespassing. Bridget was examining the floor. "Dad, come here." He joined her in the narrow space. She was kneeling, running her hands over the teak planking. "What is it?" "These boards. See how they're cut?" She traced the seams with her finger. "This isn't damage. These are intentional cuts. Like a hatch or something." Neil knelt beside her, his knees protesting. She was right. 3 planks in a row, each about 4 feet long, had been cut and fitted back together so precisely you could barely see the joints. But once you noticed them, they were obvious. He pressed down. The wood gave slightly hollow sounding. "There's space underneath," he said. They looked at each other, and for the first time in 3 years, Neil saw his daughter not as the distant, successful woman she'd become, but as the girl who used to help him in his workshop, the one who'd been fascinated by how things fit together, how they could be taken apart and rebuilt. "Should we?" Bridget started. "Not today," Neil said, though it cost him. "We need proper tools. Crowbar, flashlight, something to pry with that won't damage the wood more than necessary. There's something down there." "Yeah," Neil agreed. "I think there is." They stood, both reluctant to leave, both knowing they had to. Outside, Silas was still watching, and Neil suddenly wondered exactly what the old man knew, what Desmond might have told him, what secrets the harbour master had kept for 40 years, waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. As they climbed back down to shore, Bridget said, "We're coming back tomorrow, right?" Neil looked at his daughter, at the excitement in her face that made her look young again, and felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly, but enough to notice. "First thing in the morning," he said. "Bring work gloves." She smiled, genuine and bright. "It's a date, Dad." They drove back as the sun climbed toward noon, and for the first time in a very long time, Neil Garrison felt something that might have been hope. Sunday morning arrived cold and grey, the kind of weather that made you grateful for coffee and wool socks. Neil was awake before his alarm, had already loaded his truck with tools by the time Bridget's car pulled into the parking lot at 6:30. She climbed out holding 2 thermoses and a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon rolls. "Figured we'd need fuel," she said, handing him a thermos. They made better time on the second drive, the route familiar now, the silence between them more comfortable. Bridget had dressed practically, jeans, boots, an old sweatshirt that Neil recognized as one of Lorraine's. Seeing it made his throat tight, but in a good way, like his daughter was carrying her mother with them. The inlet looked different in the morning light, less mysterious and more workmanlike. The Meridian's call sat exactly as they'd left it, patient and waiting. Silas emerged from his shed as they parked, coffee mug in hand. "Back already," he observed. "Not quite a question. Found something yesterday we want to investigate," Neil said, pulling his toolbox from the truck bed. Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Did you now?" They crossed the muddy ground and boarded without ceremony this time. The yacht felt less foreign, still damaged, still neglected, but no longer unwelcoming. Neil led the way to the galley, while Bridget set up work lights she'd brought. Modern LED panels that turned the dim interior bright as day. In the light, the seams in the floor were even more obvious. Neil knelt and worked a thin pry bar into the gap. The wood resisted at first. 40 years of moisture had swollen the planks tight, but eventually yielded with a groan that sounded almost biological. The first board came up, then the second, the third. A compartment lay beneath, roughly 4 feet by 6 feet and nearly 2 feet deep. And it wasn't empty. "Oh my God," Bridget whispered. Wrapped packages filled the space, each about the size of a large book, covered in oilcloth and bound with twine that had survived surprisingly well. Wooden crates, small but heavy-looking, were stacked along one side. Metal boxes with clasps, everything arranged with methodical care, like someone had planned to come back for it. Neil lifted the first package. The oilcloth crinkled in his hands, stiff but intact. He unwrapped it carefully on the galley counter. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The cover was dark brown, corners reinforced with brass. The pages were yellowed but remarkably preserved, filled with neat handwriting in black ink. Neil opened to the first page. January 3rd, 1962, took possession of the Meridian's call today. She's beautiful, everything I hoped for and more. 40 feet of freedom, built for distance. The salesman asked what I planned to do with her. I told him I wanted to see the world. Didn't mention which parts or why. "It's Uncle Desmond's," Bridget said, reading over his shoulder. "This is his journal." They sat together on the galley floor, backs against the cabinets, and read. Desmond's voice emerged from the pages, educated, thoughtful, alive in a way that made Neil sad he'd never really known the man. The early entries chronicled fitting out the yacht, learning to sail her properly, planning routes up and down the coast. But by summer of 1962, the tone shifted. Met with V today, he's connected with people in the East who need certain items moved west. Documents, mostly. Some small artifacts, jewelry, art, nothing that would be missed, he says, but everything that represents something the regime wants erased. He's offering enough to fund a year of travel. Maybe more if I prove reliable. Neil looked at Bridget. He was smuggling. "Keep reading," she said. The entries grew more detailed. Desmond described meeting ships off the coast of Alaska, midnight transfers in international waters. He wrote about clients, wealthy collectors, museum representatives, sometimes just individuals trying to save family heirlooms from confiscation. The Cold War was in full freeze, and Desmond Garrison had found his niche moving cultural artifacts from Soviet territories to the West. But it wasn't simple criminality. The more Neil read, the more complex the picture became. These pieces would be destroyed otherwise. The purges aren't just political, they're cultural. Art that doesn't serve the state is dangerous. I'm not stealing, I'm preserving. At least that's what I tell myself when I can't sleep, Bridget pulled another package from the compartment. This one was heavier, more carefully wrapped. She opened it slowly, peeling back layers of cloth. A painting emerged. Small, maybe 12 by 16 inches, but clearly old. The style was abstract, angular shapes in muted colors. The canvas was cracked but stable. In the corner, a signature, a name in Cyrillic letters that Neil couldn't read. "Do you recognize this?" he asked Bridget. She was already on her phone, carefully photographing the signature. "No, but I know someone who might. Give me a minute." While she searched, Neil explored more of the compartment. The wooden crates contained more paintings, each wrapped with the same meticulous care. The metal boxes held smaller items, jewelry, small sculptures, what looked like religious icons. Everything was catalogued in Desmond's journal, with dates, descriptions, and estimated values from the 1960s. One crate, different from the others, was heavier than it should have been. Neil lifted it out, set it on the floor. The clasp was rusted but workable. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were bars of metal. Gold, unmistakably gold. There were 12 of them, each about the size of a chocolate bar, each stamped with marks Neil didn't recognize. Cyrillic letters, numbers, official-looking seals. "Bridget," he said quietly. She looked up from her phone, saw what he was holding, and went very still. "Is that—" "I think so." She came over, crouched beside him. Picked up one of the bars with both hands. "It's heavy, really heavy. Gold is dense. This is maybe a kilogram." Neil's mind was doing math he didn't want to do. "At current prices, that's probably $60,000-$70,000 each." They looked at the other 11 bars. "Dad," Bridget said, "that's almost $1 million. Just in gold." "Soviet mint marks," Neil said, examining the stamps. "Payment, probably. For his smuggling services. Why didn't he ever use it?" Neil returned to the journal, skipped ahead to entries from the late 1960s, found his answer. June 12, 1967. "The gold sits in the hold like a judgment. V insists I earned it, but every time I look at those bars, I see the faces of the people I've helped. Or the ones I couldn't help. Is there honor in being paid for doing what should be done freely? The money would solve everything, make me legitimate, give me security. But it feels like 30 pieces of silver. I think I'll leave it where it is." Bridget was methodically photographing everything, her professional instincts taking over. "We need to document all of this before we touch anything else." "Agreed. But Bridget," Neil waited until she looked at him. "This is serious. If these items were smuggled illegally, we could face charges just for possessing them, or we could return them to their rightful owners. Make things right." She gestured at the journal. "That's what Uncle Desmond wanted, isn't it? He kept all this because he didn't know what else to do with it." Neil wanted to argue, to point out the legal dangers, the complexity. But looking at his daughter, focused, determined, engaged in a way he hadn't seen in years, he couldn't bring himself to extinguish that spark. "We need expert advice," he said finally. "Someone who knows international art law, repatriation protocols. I might know someone." Bridget pulled out her phone again. "A friend from college works in art authentication. She could point us in the right direction." They spent the next 2 hours carefully removing and cataloguing everything in the compartment. 16 paintings in total, various sculptures and religious items, the gold bars, and 3 more journals documenting Desmond's activities through 1972. By noon, they'd spread everything across the salon, creating a timeline of one man's complicated relationship with morality and money. The journals revealed a person of conscience trapped in morally grey territory, trying to do good through questionable means, carrying guilt that never quite resolved. Neil sat on the deck, eating the sandwich Bridget had packed, looking out at the grey water. His daughter joined him, settling easily at his side the way she used to when she was young. "What do you think he was trying to do?" she asked. "I think he was trying to save things. Culture, history, maybe souls." Neil touched Lorraine's ring through his shirt. "I think he got in over his head and didn't know how to get out. So he just kept going, kept saving things, and hoped it would balance somehow. Do you think it did?" "I don't know. He died alone, never made peace with his family. Left all this undone." Neil looked at her. Maybe that's the real tragedy. He had the means to make things right, but ran out of time. Bridget leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so casual and natural it made Neil's chest ache with gratitude. Then we finish it for him. Yeah, Neil said. I think we do. They returned to the yacht on Monday, both having called in sick to work. It was a strange kind of playing hooky, more purposeful than rebellious, but thrilling nonetheless. Neil couldn't remember the last time he'd missed work for something that wasn't exhaustion or obligation. The freedom felt foreign and a little dangerous. Bridget arrived with notebooks and a digital camera borrowed from a photographer friend. If we're doing this properly, we need proper documentation, she explained, setting up a makeshift studio in the salon using the work lights and a clean tarp as backdrop. They photographed each item systematically. Every painting got front and back shots, details of signatures, condition notes. The journals were documented page by page, a task that took hours but felt necessary. The gold bars were weighed using a luggage scale Bridget had thought to bring. Each one was just over a kilogram, exactly as Neil had guessed. The total value of the gold alone is close to 800,000, Bridget said, making notes. That's not counting any of the art or artifacts. Neil was reading the second journal, dated 1965 through 1968. Desmond's writing had evolved, become more introspective. The entries weren't just logistics anymore, they were confessions. Listen to this, Neil said. March 1967. I met a woman in Prague today, Katerina. She's a curator at the National Museum, trying to protect pieces the government wants to erase. She has a son, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Beautiful child with his mother's dark eyes. She asked if I could help them leave. Not just save the art, save them. I told her I'd think about it, but I already know the answer. I can't save everyone. The boat isn't big enough. My courage isn't big enough. Bridget looked up from her work. Did he help her? Neil flipped ahead, scanning entries. Here, May 1968. Got word that Kay and her son made it to Vienna. I didn't bring them myself, couldn't risk it, but I connected her with people who could. She's safe. Her boy is safe. I'll never see her again, and that's the price. Some things you save by letting them go. That's heartbreaking, Bridget said softly. And noble. Neil closed the journal carefully. He gave up someone he cared about to make sure she survived. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of documentation soothing. Neil found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, even in sleep. There was something about having a purpose, about working alongside his daughter toward something meaningful that quieted the constant anxious hum that had become his normal. Around 2 in the afternoon, Bridget's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned slightly, then set it aside without responding. Everything okay? Neil asked. Just Preston. Wondering where I am. You didn't tell him? I told him I was helping you with something. She arranged a small icon for photographing, not meeting his eyes. He's been texting all day. Neil sensed fragile ground, but pushed gently forward. He's probably worried. He's probably annoyed. Bridget took the photo, adjusted the lighting. Preston likes plans, schedules. He's been planning the wedding for months. Well, his mother has been planning it, and he's been agreeing with her. Every time I suggest something different, he says, "Whatever you want, honey." But somehow it always ends up being what his mother wants. This was the most she'd said about her fiancé since mentioning the engagement. Neil chose his words carefully. That doesn't sound like a partnership. It's not. Bridget finally looked at him. And I don't know what to do about it. Everyone thinks Preston's perfect. Good job, good family, responsible. My friends all say I'm lucky, and I do care about him, Dad. I just don't know if I'm in love with him or if I'm just tired of being alone. Neil set down the journal he'd been holding. This was important. More. Important than gold or art or anything hidden in a compartment. His daughter needed him, really needed him, maybe for the first time since Lorraine died. After your mother got sick, he said slowly, I threw myself into work. Extra shifts, projects around the house, anything to stay busy. I told myself I was being strong, providing, but really I was just avoiding feeling anything at all. Dad, let me finish. He moved to sit beside her on the salon bench. When she died, I kept doing it. Worked myself into exhaustion every day so I wouldn't have to face the empty house. And I shut you out because seeing you meant feeling everything I was trying to avoid. Your grief reminded me of mine, and I couldn't handle both. Bridget's eyes were wet. I needed you, I know, and I failed you. I'm so sorry, Bridget. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. I'm sorry I made you face losing your mother alone. You were hurting too. That's not an excuse. You deserved a father who could be present, even in pain. Especially in pain. He took her hand, something he hadn't done in years. And I think maybe you're doing what I did, filling the space with someone, because being alone feels too much like that grief. She wiped her eyes with her free hand. Preston's not a bad person. I'm not saying he is. But marrying someone because they're not bad, because it's the sensible thing, because everyone approves, that's not enough. Your mother used to say that life's too short for good enough. She was right. I don't know what I want. That's okay. You don't have to know right now. Neil squeezed her hand. But don't marry someone because you're afraid of disappointing people. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings of loneliness. They sat together in the dim salon, surrounded by artifacts of another man's complicated life, and Neil felt something shift between them. Not healed, exactly. Healing took more than one conversation, but opening. Like the first crack in ice that's held too long. I think I need to talk to Preston, Bridget said eventually. Really talk. About what I want and what I'm feeling, even if it's messy and uncertain. That sounds wise. When did you get wise? Neil smiled. I'm not. I'm just finally starting to figure things out. About 40 years too late, but better late than never. They returned to work, but the atmosphere had changed. Lighter somehow, more honest. Bridget asked about Lorraine. Not the careful, painful questions from before, but real memories. What she'd been like when they first met, how she'd handled being married to someone as quiet as Neil, what her laugh sounded like when she was truly happy. Neil answered, and for the first time, remembering didn't feel like bleeding. It felt like honoring, like bringing Lorraine into the yacht with them, letting her be part of what they were building together. By evening, they'd documented everything. The inventory was complete, cross-referenced with Desmond's journals, ready for whatever expert opinion they could find. As they packed up for the day, Neil discovered one more item he'd missed, a small brass compass in a drawer of the navigation station. The compass was beautiful, old, engraved with Cyrillic letters around the rim. It still worked, the needle swinging to point north with satisfying precision. "What do the letters say?" Bridget asked. "No idea, but your uncle definitely spent time in Soviet territories." Neil turned the compass over. On the back, scratched into the brass, Prague, 1968. The same year he helped Katerina escape, Bridget said. Maybe it was hers, a gift or a reminder. They locked the yacht carefully before leaving. Silas watched from his shed, and Neil realized the old man had been present but quiet all day, observing but not interfering. "Learning anything interesting?" Silas called as they reached the truck. "Learning that my uncle was more complicated than I knew," Neil replied. Silas nodded slowly. "Desmond Garrison was a lot of things, not all of them legal. But he wasn't a bad man, just a man who made choices he couldn't unmake." On the drive back, Bridget was quiet, processing. Neil understood. They'd gone looking for answers and found more questions, but they'd also found each other again, and that felt like the start of something worth protecting. Tuesday morning brought rain, the kind of steady Oregon drizzle that could last for days. Neil sat in his apartment with coffee, and Desmond's journals spread across his small kitchen table. He'd called into the hardware store, asked for a few days off. His manager had been surprised. Neil never took time off, but agreed without argument. Bridget had texted that she was taking the week off too, using vacation days she'd been hoarding. They'd agreed to meet at the yacht again Wednesday, but today Neil wanted to read through everything without distraction, to understand his uncle's full story before they moved forward. The third journal covered 1969 through 1972, and the tone was darker. Desmond's initial idealism had worn thin. The entries chronicled increasing doubts, moral wrestling, the weight of accumulated compromises. February 1970. How many pieces can you save before you realize you're just rearranging deck chairs? The regime doesn't fall because I smuggle paintings. Artists still suffer. People still disappear. I'm a feel-good story, I tell myself, while cashing checks that could feed families for months. But mixed with the guilt were entries about real people helped. A dissident writer who escaped with manuscripts hidden in the hull. A Jewish family whose heirlooms Neil recognized from the inventory. Silver candlesticks, a Torah scroll, photographs. Desmond had moved people and memory, culture and hope. Neil's phone rang. Bridget, Dad, I need to tell you something. Her voice had that tight quality that meant difficult conversation ahead. Neil set down his coffee. I'm listening. I talked to Preston last night. Really talked. A pause. I told him I needed time to think about the wedding, that I wasn't sure I was ready. How did he take it? He said I was being irrational, that I was letting this yacht thing distract me from real life. He said helping you clean out some old boat wasn't a reason to derail our plans. Her voice cracked slightly. He called Uncle Desmond's things junk, said I was wasting time on the past instead of focusing on our future. Neil felt anger rise, hot and protective. That's not fair to you. No, it's not. And the thing is, Dad, I realized he's done that before. Dismissed things that matter to me because they don't fit his idea of what's important. My photography, my interest in art history, even, she stopped, even my grief. After Mom died, he told me I needed to move on after 6 months, like there's a schedule for losing your mother. Bridget, I ended it last night. Gave him back the ring. She was crying now, but her voice was steady. His mother is going to be furious. My friends are going to think I'm crazy. But I can't marry someone who doesn't see me, you know? Who doesn't understand that the past matters, that family matters, that sometimes the important things are messy and complicated and don't fit in a planner. Neil felt pride swell in his chest. That took courage. I'm terrified. What if I made a mistake? Then you made it for the right reasons? Your mother would be proud of you, Bridget, for choosing truth over convenience. I'm proud of you too, she sniffled. Thanks, Dad, that means a lot. Are you okay? Do you need company? No, I'm okay. Actually, I'm going to come down early tomorrow. There's something I want to research at the county records office near the inlet, about Uncle Desmond's property ownership. After they hung up, Neil returned to the journals with renewed focus. His daughter had just made one of the hardest decisions of her life, and she'd done it with strength that reminded him achingly of Lorraine. The least he could do was honor Desmond's story by understanding it fully. The entries from 1971 revealed a turning point. Desmond had started planning something bigger. June 15, 1971, met with an attorney in Seattle. Asked about setting up a foundation, something that could legally handle repatriation of cultural artifacts. He looked at me like I was insane when I explained where the artifacts came from. Said I'd need to disclose everything to authorities, that there would be investigations, possibly charges. But he also said if I approached it correctly, with full transparency and genuine intent to make restitution, the courts might be sympathetic. Might. September 3rd, 1971. Stop taking new assignments. V is furious. Says I'm abandoning the work. But I can't keep doing this. Can't keep profiting from other people's desperation, no matter how I justify it. The gold stays in the boat. The artifacts stay in the boat. When I'm ready, when I have the courage, I'll do what should have been done from the start. Return everything to where it belongs. But that courage never came. The entries grew sparser through 1972, then stopped entirely. The fourth journal, from 1973 to 1979, was mostly maintenance logs and brief notes about staying on the yacht, rarely leaving the inlet. Desmond had become a hermit, trapped by guilt and indecision. The final entries were heartbreaking. March 1979. Saw a doctor finally. He used words like aggressive and metastatic. asked if I had family to notify. I thought about Robert, about the nephew I barely know, thought about calling, apologizing for the years of silence. But what would I say? Sorry I abandoned the family to become a smuggler, by the way, I'm dying? Pride is a terrible companion in old age. April 1979, Silas has agreed to watch over the Meridian after I'm gone. Paid him what I could, told him to maintain her until someone from the family comes looking. If they don't, well, at least the boat will have a guardian. The cargo stays hidden. Maybe someday someone will find it and do what I couldn't, make it right. The last entry was dated May 10th, 1979. I thought I had more time. We always think we have more time. If I could do it over, I'd call Robert tomorrow. I'd apologize for being stubborn. I'd meet my nephew, be part of the family I rejected. I'd create that foundation, face whatever consequences came, and sleep better, knowing I'd tried to fix my mistakes. But if is the saddest word in any language. The artifacts are documented in the hidden compartment. The journals explain everything. Whoever finds this, finish what I couldn't. Please. Neil sat with that final plea for a long time. His uncle had died alone, eaten by regret, unable to bridge the gaps he'd created. The parallel to Neil's own life after Lorraine's death was uncomfortably clear. How easily he could have ended up the same way, isolated, full of intentions never acted on, leaving his own daughter with nothing but questions and might-have-beens. But he hadn't. Bridget had given him another chance, and he was taking it. His phone buzzed with a text from Bridget. Found something at the records office. Uncle Desmond tried to deed the yacht to a historical society in 1978. They rejected it, said they didn't have resources for maritime preservation. He had no backup plan. Neil typed back, "We're his backup plan. We'll figure it out together." Her response came quickly. "Together sounds good, Dad." That evening, Neil did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to the storage unit where he'd boxed up Lorraine's things from their house, the items that hadn't fit in the apartment, the pieces of their life together he couldn't bear to see daily, but couldn't throw away either. He found what he was looking for in the third box, the leather portfolio Lorraine had kept for years, full of family documents and photographs, birth certificates, marriage license, old letters. And there, near the bottom, letters from Robert to Lorraine, written during their courtship. In one letter, Robert mentioned his brother. Desmond sent another postcard, this time from Istanbul. "Mother wants me to write back, to try to mend things, but I don't know what to say to someone who chooses adventure over responsibility. Maybe I'm jealous. Maybe I wish I had his courage to leave. But someone has to stay, to do the work, to build something lasting. I suppose we all make our choices." Neil understood both sides now. Robert's resentment of a brother who'd escaped. Desmond's loneliness in that escape. Two men who loved each other but couldn't find the words. Separated by pride and time, until separation became permanent. He wouldn't let that happen with Bridget. Whatever it took, whatever mistakes he'd made, they were building something different, something that honored both Lorraine and Desmond, a legacy of courage and honesty and showing up even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Wednesday dawned clearer, the rain having scrubbed the sky clean. Neil and Bridget met at a small diner near Crescent Inlet for breakfast before heading to the yacht. She looked tired, but lighter somehow. Like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying too long. "How are you holding up?" Neil asked as they settled into a booth. "Honestly, better than I expected. Preston's mother called 4 times yesterday. I let it go to voicemail." Bridget poured cream into her coffee. "My friends are split. Half think I'm brave, half think I've lost my mind. But I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. That's what matters. I've been thinking about what to do next. With my life, I mean. The marketing job pays well, but it's not what I love. I got into it because it was stable, because it made sense. But Uncle Desmond's journals made me realize how short life can be. How much time we waste doing things that don't matter to us." Neil smiled. "Your mother used to say that. She'd tell me I spent too much time being sensible." She was right. Bridget pulled out her phone, showed him a folder of photographs. "I've been taking pictures again. Really taking them, not just phone snapshots. These are from the yacht. The images were remarkable. Bridget had captured the Meridian in ways that showed both its decay and its dignity. Close-ups of brass fittings green with age. The way light filtered through broken windows. The journals spread across the salon table like artifacts in a museum. She'd documented their work with an artist's eye. "These are beautiful," Neil said, genuinely moved. "I want to do this. Photography, I mean. Maybe focus on historical documentation, preservation stories. There's something powerful about capturing things before they disappear." She put the phone away. "The money from the gold, if we're allowed to keep any of it, I'd use it to go back to school. Get proper training. I think that's exactly what you should do." They finished breakfast and drove to the inlet. Silas was waiting, which was unusual. Normally he let them work without interference, but today he stood by the gangway, arms crossed. "Morning," Neil said carefully. "We need to talk," Silas said. "About what you found." Neil and Bridget exchanged glances. "What about it?" "I helped Desmond. Back in the 70s, moved some cargo for him, kept quiet about his business. He paid me fair, and I figured what he did was his concern." Silas shifted his weight. "But after he died, I kept thinking about what was in that boat. Kept wondering if maybe I deserved a share." "A share," Neil repeated flatly. "I maintained the yacht for 40 years. Kept her from being condemned, sold for scrap. That's worth something." His jaw set stubbornly. "Desmond told me once that if his family ever came for the boat, I should help them understand what he was doing. But he also said I'd be taken care of. That's what I'm asking now, to be taken care of." Bridget stepped forward. "How much did Uncle Desmond pay you for maintenance?" "He left me $5,000. That ran out by 1985, and after that you chose to keep watching the yacht," she said. "That was your choice, not an obligation. I had an understanding with Desmond. Do you have that in writing?" Neil asked. "Any documentation of this agreement?" Silas's expression hardened. "Man's word used to mean something. I'm not doubting your word about helping him. But claiming a share of the cargo 40 years later, that's different." Neil kept his voice level. "We're planning to work with authorities to return these items properly. If you have a legitimate claim, it'll be addressed through that process. And if I go to the county sheriff right now, tell them you're removing smuggled goods from that boat?" The threat hung in the air. Bridget's face flushed with anger, but Neil put a hand on her arm. "You could do that," Neil said quietly. "And we'd explain that we discovered these items, and we're in the process of seeking legal guidance on proper handling. We've documented everything, contacted experts. We're not hiding anything. You could also cost yourself any legitimate compensation," Bridget added, her voice tight. "Because right now, you're moving from reasonable request to blackmail." Silas looked at them both, something calculating in his eyes. "I'll give you folks a week to think about it. Come up with a fair number. Otherwise, I make some phone calls." He walked back to his shed, leaving Neil and Bridget standing by the yacht. "Can he really cause problems?" Bridget asked. "Maybe, probably." Neil rubbed his face. "But he's not wrong that he helped Desmond. The question is whether that help entitles him to a share of illegal cargo." They boarded the yacht, but the morning's discovery had soured the mood. They worked in near silence, both processing this new complication. Neil found himself in the captain's quarters, a small cabin he hadn't thoroughly searched before. The space was intimate, a narrow bunk, a small desk, shelves for books. Desmond had lived here, spent his final years in this confined space. Neil opened the desk drawers systematically. Charts, navigation tools, a broken compass, and in the bottom drawer, wrapped in sailcloth, a bundle of letters. The envelopes were addressed, but never mailed. All to the same person, Robert Garrison. Neil's hands shook slightly as he opened the first one, dated 1965. "Dear Robert, I know it's been 3 years since we spoke. I know you think I abandoned the family, chose selfishness over responsibility. Maybe you're right. But I want you to know that I think of you often. Wonder how you're doing, whether you married that girl you were courting, whether you're happy. I'm not happy, but I'm not sure happiness was ever the point for me. I'm looking for something else. Purpose maybe, redemption, I don't know. Love, Desmond." There were 15 letters in total, one every few years, spanning from 1965 to 1978. Neil read them in chronological order, his throat growing tighter with each one. Desmond had never stopped loving his brother, never stopped hoping for reconciliation. But pride, stubbornness, shame, something had kept him from actually mailing these letters. The last one, from December 1978, was the hardest to read. "Dear Robert, I'm not well. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I should call you, should try to make peace before it's too late, but I don't know what to say. How do you apologize for a lifetime of absence? How do you bridge 20 years of silence with a phone call? I was wrong, Robert. Wrong to leave, wrong to stay away, wrong to let my pride matter more than my family. I wish I could undo it. I wish I could come home. But some bridges burn too thoroughly to rebuild. I hope you've had a good life. I hope your son, I understand you have a son now, grows up knowing he's loved. That matters more than any fortune or adventure. Family matters more than anything. I learned that too late. Your brother, Desmond." Neil sat on the narrow bunk, holding letters his father had never seen, and wept. For his uncle, dying alone with words unsaid. For his father, never knowing his brother had wanted to come home. For himself, and all the years he'd wasted avoiding his own daughter because grief made him feel weak. Bridget found him there. She read the letters without speaking, tears streaming down her face. "They loved each other," she said finally. "They did. And it didn't matter, because neither of them could say it. We're not doing that. We're not letting pride win." "No," Neil agreed. "We're not." They sat together in Desmond's cabin, surrounded by his lonely life, and made a silent promise to honor his regrets by not repeating them. That afternoon, they made a decision. They needed professional help, someone who understood international art law, cultural repatriation, the complex legal terrain they were navigating. Bridget's college friend came through with a contact, Dr. Vivian Constance, who worked in the State Department's Cultural Heritage Division. Dr. Constance agreed to drive up Friday morning. In the meantime, Neil and Bridget continued their methodical documentation, but the work felt different now. Silas's threat loomed. The unsent letters haunted them, and underneath everything, the question remained. What exactly had Desmond been doing for all those years? Thursday afternoon, Bridget was examining the captain's quarters more carefully, looking for anything they might have missed. She ran her hands along the wood paneling, checking for more hidden compartments. The walls were teak, beautifully maintained, the grain patterns flowing naturally, except in one spot. "Dad, look at this." Neil joined her. She was pointing at a section of paneling where the grain didn't quite match the surrounding wood. It was subtle. You'd only notice if you were looking carefully, but once you saw it, it was obvious. "Different wood," Neil said, running his fingers over it. "Installed later, maybe." They examined the edges. The panel was about 2 feet square, fitted so precisely into the surrounding wall that the seams were nearly invisible. Neil fetched a thin-bladed knife from his toolbox and carefully worked it into the gap. The panel popped free. Behind it was a shallow compartment, maybe 3 inches deep. Inside was a rolled document in a waterproof tube and a small leather pouch. Neil extracted both carefully. The tube contained a map, not nautical charts, but a world map marked with specific coordinates in red ink. 6 locations across 3 continents, each marked with a date and a coded notation that matched the system Desmond used in his journals. "These are cache sites," Bridget said, studying the map. "Other places he hid things." Neil felt his stomach drop. The yacht's cargo was just the beginning. Desmond's operation had been far more extensive than they'd imagined. The leather pouch contained something else, a list of names and addresses, some crossed out, some with notes beside them. Neil recognized one name immediately, Katarina Svoboda, with an address in Vienna dated 1972. "The woman from Prague," Bridget said. "She might still be alive. If she is, she's in her 80s. Neil studied the other names. Some had notes like deceased 1970 or relocated, no forwarding. Others had question marks. These must be the people Desmond helped, or tried to help. They spread everything on the captain's desk, the map, the list, the journals, their inventory, trying to see the full picture of what Desmond had created and what he'd left behind. If there are 6 more cache sites, Bridget said slowly, and each one contains even a fraction of what we found here. We're talking about millions of dollars. Maybe tens of millions. Neil sat down heavily. And potentially illegal artifacts in multiple countries. Or cultural treasures that need to be returned to their rightful owners. The legal complexity alone. Neil shook his head. We'd need lawyers, experts in international law, cooperation from multiple governments. This isn't something two people can handle. Bridget was quiet for a moment, then said, Uncle Desmond couldn't handle it either. That's why he died with it unfinished. Before Neil could respond, they heard footsteps on the deck. Heavy, purposeful. Silas appeared in the doorway of the captain's quarters, and his expression made Neil's chest tighten with warning. Thought I'd find you folks here, Silas said. His voice was different, harder, less friendly. Been thinking about our conversation yesterday. We told you we'd work through proper channels, Neil said, standing. Proper channels take time. I don't have time. Silas stepped into the small cabin, crowding the space. 40 years I've waited, watching this boat, wondering what Desmond left inside. Wondering if I was a fool for keeping quiet all these years. What do you want, Silas? Bridget asked. I want what I'm owed. $3 million. The value of those gold bars, roughly. You give me that, I disappear. I never saw anything, never helped with anything. Don't know anything about what's in this boat. Neil felt anger surge. That's extortion. That's business. You've got at least 10 times that much in artifacts here. Probably more in those other locations. He nodded at the map on the desk. Yeah, I've been watching through the windows. Desmond told me once there were other caches. Never told me where, but I knew they existed. You have no legal claim. I have photographs. Silas pulled a phone from his pocket. You removing items from the yacht. Taken over the past few days. And I've got documentation that Desmond asked me to be executor of his estate. Never filed it officially, but it's signed and dated. You're lying, Bridget said. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. But you want to spend the next 3 years in court fighting about it? Want the authorities investigating every item you've touched? Because I can make that happen with one phone call. He smiled, and it was cold. Or you pay me what I'm asking, and this all goes smooth. Your choice. Neil's mind raced. They couldn't pay what Silas was demanding. They didn't have access to that kind of money, not without selling the gold, which they couldn't legally do without proper documentation and clearance. But if Silas went to the authorities with accusations, even false ones, it could derail everything they were trying to do. We need time, Neil said. You've got until tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. We meet here, you bring a cashier's check, and we're done. Silas backed toward the door. I'm not a bad man, Neil, but I'm tired of being poor while sitting on a fortune. Desmond promised me I'd be taken care of. I'm just making sure that happens. He left. They heard his footsteps crossing the deck, then silence. Bridget was shaking with anger. He can't do this. He can try. Neil looked at the map, the list of names, the journals documenting Desmond's complicated legacy. Everything they'd found, everything they were trying to do right, was about to be threatened by an old man's desperation and greed. But maybe there was another way. We need to call Dr. Constance, he said. Tell her everything, including Silas's threat. If we're going to do this properly, we need to start now. Full disclosure, full cooperation with authorities. It's the only way to protect ourselves and honor what Desmond wanted. What if Silas follows through? What if he makes those calls? Then we tell the truth. That we discovered something significant, documented it carefully, and were in the process of seeking proper guidance when someone tried to extort us. Neil touched Lorraine's ring through his shirt. Your mother used to say that you can't control what other people do, only how you respond. We respond with honesty. Bridget nodded slowly. Okay, we call it tonight. They locked the yacht carefully, both aware of Silas watching from his shed. The weight of what they'd discovered, the additional cache sites, the scope of Desmond's operation, the threat of exposure, pressed down like weather about to break. As they drove away, Neil looked at his daughter and saw the same determination he felt. They would finish what Desmond started. They would do it right, and they would do it together no matter what came next. Dr. Vivian Constance arrived Friday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, driving a government sedan and carrying 2 briefcases. She was mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the kind of focused energy that came from years of dealing with complex international situations. Neil and Bridget met her at a coffee shop in the nearest town, neutral ground, where they could talk freely. "I appreciate you coming on such short notice," Neil said, as they settled into a corner booth. "Your situation sounded urgent." Dr. Constance pulled out a tablet and stylus. "Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me everything?" They did. Neil explained about the inheritance, the discovery of the hidden compartment, the journals documenting Desmond's smuggling operation. Bridget showed her the photographs they'd taken, the inventory they'd compiled. When they got to the map with additional cache sites, Dr. Constance's expression shifted from professional interest to something more intense. "6 additional locations," she said quietly. "Do you have any idea what might be at these sites?" "No, the journals don't specify. Just that Desmond was moving artifacts for nearly 20 years. Neil hesitated. "There's something else. The harbour master who's been watching the yacht has threatened to go to authorities with accusations if we don't pay him $3 million by tonight." Dr. Constance set down her stylus. "That's extortion, we know. But he claims to have documentation showing he was supposed to be executor of Desmond's estate. Claims Desmond promised him compensation. Do you believe him?" Bridget shook her head. "I think he helped my uncle with 1 or 2 shipments and has spent 40 years convincing himself he's owed more than he was paid. But he could cause problems," Neil added. "Muddy the waters legally, create complications we can't afford." Dr. Constance was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Here's what I can offer. I work with a task force that handles cultural heritage crimes and repatriation. What you've described, if it's authentic, represents one of the most significant Cold War-era art recoveries in decades. If you're willing to cooperate fully, to voluntarily disclose everything you found and work with us through proper channels, I can offer you protection from prosecution." "What about Silas?" Bridget asked. "Extortion is a federal crime. If he follows through on his threats, he's the one facing charges, not you. Especially if you're already working with us in good faith." She pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. "This is an FBI agent who works with our task force. Call him before you meet with this harbor master. Explain the situation. Let them record the encounter." Neil took the card, feeling relief and apprehension in equal measure. "What happens to the artifacts?" "That depends. Items will need to be authenticated, provenance established. Some may be claimed by foreign governments, others by private individuals or institutions. If Desmond acquired things during regime purges, and those items were genuinely at risk of destruction, there may be some legal grey area that works in your favor. But I can't promise anything except that we'll handle it properly." "What about compensation?" Bridget asked. "I'm not asking out of greed, but practically, my father has been working 2 jobs just to survive. If there's any finder's fee or reward, there may be. Some governments offer compensation for recovery and return of stolen cultural property. The gold bars are a separate issue. Depending on how they were acquired, you might have claim to those. But again, no promises. This process will take months, possibly years." "We understand," Neil said. "We're not doing this for money. We're doing it because it's right." Dr. Constance smiled for the first time. "That's exactly the attitude that will serve you well. Now I need to see everything. The yacht, the artifacts, all of your documentation." They drove in convoy to Crescent Inlet. Silas was nowhere to be seen, which was unusual. His shed door was closed, no smoke from the chimney. Neil felt uneasy as they parked. "Should we find him?" Bridget asked. "Let him know we have someone official here?" "Later," Dr. Constance said. "Right now, I need to examine what you found." They spent the next 3 hours on the yacht. Dr. Constance worked methodically, photographing everything with professional equipment, taking detailed notes, cross-referencing items with databases on her laptop. She handled the journals reverently, reading sections aloud, making observations about Desmond's activities. Your uncle was moving primarily Russian and Eastern European pieces, she said. Art that was deemed degenerate or counter-revolutionary by various regimes. Some of these artists were imprisoned or killed. Their work was supposed to be destroyed. If Desmond saved even a fraction of it, he was preserving pieces of cultural history that would otherwise be lost forever. So what he did was good? Bridget asked. What he did was complicated. He broke laws, certainly. Engaged in smuggling, worked with criminals. But the moral calculus is difficult when the alternative was destruction of irreplaceable art. Dr. Constance closed one of the journals carefully. The courts will have to sort that out. My job is to ensure these items get where they belong. She examined the gold bars, took photographs of the mint marks, made notes about their probable origin. These are Soviet state gold, payment for services rendered, most likely. The fact that your uncle never spent them suggests guilt, or at least moral conflict about accepting payment. He wrote about that in the journals, Neil said. Called it his 30 pieces of silver. Biblical reference. Judas's payment for betrayal, Dr. Constance nodded. Your uncle had a conscience. That's clear from everything I've seen. By noon, she'd completed her examination. I'll need to bring in a team. Probably by Monday. We'll need to remove everything carefully, transport it to a secure facility for proper authentication and cataloging. This location isn't appropriate for long-term storage. Too much environmental damage risk. What about Silas? Neil asked. Our deadline is 6 o'clock tonight. I'll call the FBI contact now. They'll want to set up surveillance, record any exchange. But Neil, Bridget, you need to understand that once we involve law enforcement, this becomes an official investigation. Everything changes. Are you ready for that? Neil looked at his daughter. She met his eyes and he saw certainty there, strength. The same strength Lorraine had always had when facing difficult decisions. We're ready, Bridget said. They walked, Dr. Constance, back to her car. As she was loading her briefcases, Silas finally appeared, walking up from the direction of town. He saw the three of them and stopped, suspicious. Who's this? He called out. Dr. Vivian Constance, State Department. Cultural Heritage Division, she said, showing him credentials. I understand you've been maintaining this property. I'd like to ask you some questions about your arrangement with Desmond Garrison. Silas's face went carefully neutral. Don't know that I have anything to say. That's your right. But I should inform you that any artifacts found on this vessel are now under federal jurisdiction. Any claims to compensation will need to go through official channels. She smiled pleasantly. I assume you'll want to file those claims properly. Silas looked at Neil and Bridget, and his expression was pure betrayal. You called the government. We're doing things the right way, Neil said. The way Desmond would have wanted if he'd had the courage. You're making a mistake. I could have kept quiet. Could have let you folks handle this privately. Take what you wanted, and nobody would know. Silas's hands clenched into fists. Now you've got federal agents involved. They'll take everything. You won't see a dime. That's not why we're doing this, Bridget said. Then you're fools. Silas turned and walked back toward his shed, shoulders rigid with anger. Dr. Constance watched him go. He's going to be a problem. Probably, Neil agreed. But we've dealt with problems before. They spent the afternoon with an FBI agent who arrived within 2 hours of Dr. Constance's call. He was younger than Neil expected, efficient and thorough. He had them write out detailed statements, recorded their account of Silas's extortion attempt, set up a plan for the evening meeting. We'll have agents positioned out of sight, he explained. Recording equipment. If he makes specific threats or demands, we'll have evidence. But you need to let him talk, don't agree to anything, and definitely don't hand over any money. We don't have any money to hand over, Neil said dryly. Good. That makes it simpler. As 6 o'clock approached, Neil felt his heart rate increase. This was it, the moment when everything would either resolve cleanly or explode into chaos. Bridget stood beside him, and he was grateful for her presence. Whatever happened, they'd face it together. They walked down to the yacht at 5:55. Silas was already there, standing on the deck like he owned it. Behind them, invisible in the trees, federal agents watched and waited. "Well," Silas said as they approached, "you got my money?" Neil took a breath, looked at his daughter one more time for courage, and said the words that would change everything. "No, but we need to talk about what happens next." Silas's expression shifted from expectant to wary. "What's there to talk about? I made my terms clear." "Your terms are extortion," Neil said, keeping his voice steady, "and we're not paying." "Then I make my calls." Silas pulled out his phone. "County sheriff first, then maybe some reporters. Family looting historical artifacts from deceased uncle's yacht. That'll look good in the papers." "Go ahead," Bridget said. "We've already contacted the State Department and the FBI. They know everything. We're cooperating fully with authorities to ensure proper handling of the artifacts." Silas froze, the phone halfway to his ear. "You did what?" "We're doing what my uncle should have done years ago," Neil said, "working with proper channels to return these items to their rightful owners. If you have a legitimate claim for compensation, you can file it through official processes." "You had no right." Silas's face flushed red. "Desmond promised me. Promised I'd be taken care of if I kept quiet all these years." "Did he?" Neil asked. "Or did you convince yourself of that after he died? Because I've read every journal, every letter. Desmond mentions paying you for maintenance work, $5,000 in 1979. There's no mention of ongoing compensation, no promise of a share." "We had an understanding." "Show us documentation," Bridget challenged. "You said you have papers showing you were named executor. Let's see them." Silas's jaw worked. "They're at my house." "Convenient." Bridget crossed her arms. "The FBI will want to see those papers. They'll verify authenticity, check signatures, dates. If they're real, you'll get your claim heard properly. If they're fake, you'll face charges for fraud and extortion." "I helped him." Silas's voice rose, desperate now. "I moved cargo, kept watch, didn't ask questions when other boats came at night. I could have reported him a dozen times, could have turned him in, saved myself trouble. But I stayed loyal, and he paid you for that loyalty," Neil said, softer now. "Fair wages for work done. But that doesn't entitle you to millions of dollars 40 years later. He died and left me with nothing. I've lived in that shed, barely scraping by, while that boat sat full of fortune. You think that's fair?" "No," Neil admitted. "It's not fair. Life rarely is. But threatening us, trying to extort money we don't have access to, that's not the answer." Silas looked between them, something crumbling in his expression. The anger was draining away, leaving only exhaustion and defeat. He was old, Neil realized. Old and scared and holding on to a fantasy he'd built over decades of waiting. "I kept her safe," Silas said quietly, gesturing at the yacht. "The Meridian could have reported her as abandoned, let the county seize and scrap her, could have broken in myself, taken what I wanted. But I kept my word to Desmond. Thought that meant something." "It does mean something," Bridget said, her voice gentler. "Uncle Desmond trusted you. That trust was worth something, even if he didn't pay what you think it was worth. Trust doesn't keep the lights on. Trust doesn't save a house from foreclosure." Silas shook his head. "You folks don't understand what it's like, spending your whole life doing the right thing, watching everyone else get ahead while you stay stuck." Neil understood better than Silas knew. The years of working 2 jobs, barely keeping his head above water, watching life narrow to survival. The difference was that Neil had never expected anyone else to fix it for him. "What did Desmond actually promise you?" Neil asked. "Not what you hoped, not what you imagined. What did he actually say?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he said if anyone from his family came looking, I should help them understand what he'd been doing. Said I'd be remembered for keeping faith, that it would matter. "And you have been," Neil said. "Dr. Constance asked about you. You'll be part of the official record, the man who maintained the Meridian for 40 years. That's a legacy. Legacy doesn't pay bills." "No, but the State Department has protocols for people who assist in cultural recovery. If you cooperate, if you share what you know about Desmond's operation, there may be compensation available. Small, probably. Thousands, not millions. but legitimate. And if I don't cooperate, then you face charges for extortion and possibly obstruction of a federal investigation. Neil, let that sink in. You have a choice, Silas. You can be part of finishing what Desmond started, helping return these artifacts properly, or you can be the person who tried to profit from their theft. Silas looked at the yacht, at the vessel he'd watched over for so long. His shoulders sagged. I'm not a bad person. I don't think you are, Neil said honestly. I think you're scared and tired, and you've been waiting too long for something that was never coming. But this is your chance to do right by Desmond's memory, to be part of something bigger than money. Your uncle would want you to help, Bridget added, not for profit, but because it's the right thing. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the trees, Neil knew agents were recording everything. This confrontation would become part of the official record, evidence in whatever legal proceedings followed. But in this moment, it was just three people standing on an old yacht, trying to figure out how to honor a complicated legacy. The papers I mentioned, Silas said finally. I don't actually have them. Made that up. Thought it would strengthen my position. He looked at his feet. I helped Desmond load cargo twice, 1973 and 1974. He paid me $200 each time. Good money then. That was the extent of our arrangement. Everything else, the promises, the understanding, I built that up in my own head over the years. Thank you for being honest, Neil said. The foreclosure is real. I'm losing my house in 3 months if I can't come up with $12,000. Silas met Neil's eyes. That's why I got desperate. Why I convinced myself I was owed something big enough to fix everything. Neil felt Bridget tense beside him. He knew what she was thinking because he was thinking it too. $12,000 wasn't nothing, but it was manageable. If they were allowed to keep any of the gold, if there were any finder's fees or rewards, they could help. But that wasn't a decision for right now. Work with the authorities, Neil said. Tell them everything you know. And when this is all settled, when we know what we're allowed to keep or what compensation we receive, we'll talk. No promises, but we won't forget that you kept the Meridian safe. Silas studied him, searching for deception or false hope. Whatever he saw made him nod slowly. All right. I'll cooperate, but not because I trust you folks particularly, because I'm too old and too tired to fight anymore. That's good enough, Bridget said. Agents emerged from the trees then, and the formal process began. Statements, recordings, documentation. Silas answered their questions tiredly, no longer defensive, just worn down by years of hope deferred and dreams unrealized. As the sun set over Crescent Inlet, Neil stood with his daughter and watched federal agents process the scene. The Meridian's call would be emptied soon, its secrets catalogued and distributed to museums and governments and rightful owners across the world. But the real treasure, the connection he'd rebuilt with Bridget, that was theirs to keep. The investigation moved swiftly once Silas agreed to cooperate. Over the weekend, a team of specialists arrived with proper equipment, climate-controlled transport containers, archival materials, documentation protocols that made Bridget's amateur efforts look like kindergarten art projects. Dr. Constance supervised everything with meticulous care. Each item was photographed from multiple angles, measured, weighed, chemically analyzed. The journals were digitized, page by page. Even the yacht itself was documented as a historical artifact, its modifications and hidden compartments examined by maritime historians. Neil and Bridget were asked to stay available, but not to interfere. They watched from shore as strangers carefully removed pieces of Desmond's life and loaded them into government vehicles. It felt wrong somehow, like watching someone else sort through a loved one's belongings. But it was necessary. On Sunday afternoon, Dr. Constance invited them to a makeshift command center she'd established in a rented conference room at a nearby hotel. Spread across multiple tables were preliminary findings, authentication reports, provenance research. I wanted you to see what you've helped recover, she said, gesturing at the displays. 16 paintings, authenticated as original works by artists who were suppressed or killed during Soviet purges. 7 of these pieces were thought destroyed. Their recovery alone is historically significant. She moved to another table. Religious artifacts, icons, ceremonial items that were confiscated during anti-religious campaigns. Several Jewish families have already been contacted based on your uncle's records. They're descendants of the original owners. Imagine what it means to them to recover these items after 3 generations. Bridget's eyes were wet. Uncle Desmond saved these things. He did, through morally questionable means, but yes, he saved them. Dr. Constance opened one of the journals to a marked page. This entry from 1968 talks about a Torah scroll he helped smuggle out of Leningrad. We found that scroll. It's being returned to the synagogue it was taken from. They're planning a ceremony. Neil felt something loosen in his chest. Desmond's guilt, his isolation, his inability to complete what he'd started. It didn't have to be the end of the story. They were writing a different ending. What about the other cache sites? Bridget asked, looking at the map. We're working with international partners to investigate. 3 of the locations are in Europe, accessible. 2 are in former Soviet territories, more complicated politically, but not impossible. 1 is in South America. We'll recover what we can. Dr. Constance paused. Some items may be gone, lost to time or theft. But your uncle's documentation gives us the best chance we've had in decades to recover significant cultural artifacts. And legally? Neil asked. What happens to us? You're clear. You discovered stolen property, immediately contacted authorities, and cooperated fully. There's no criminal liability. In fact, she pulled out a folder. Several governments offer finder's fees for recovery of stolen cultural property. It'll take time to process, but you'll likely receive compensation. Not millions, but significant. And the gold bars? Complex question. They're payment for illegal activity, which normally would mean forfeiture. But given that your uncle never spent them, never profited, and you're voluntarily turning them over, there's precedent for partial return to the finder. I'd estimate you might receive 30 to 40% of their value. Maybe $300,000 total. Neil exchanged glances with Bridget. That wasn't a fortune, but it was life-changing money. Enough to stop working 2 jobs. Enough for Bridget to go back to school. Enough to help Silas with his foreclosure, if they chose to. There's one more thing, Dr. Constance said. She pulled out a photograph of an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. We found Katerina Svoboda. She's 83, living in Vienna. When we contacted her about the artifacts, she asked if she could meet Desmond's family. She has things she'd like to tell you about him. Bridget took the photo with shaking hands. The woman from Prague. The woman your uncle loved enough to let go. She's been carrying his memory for 50 years. She'd like to share it with someone who knew him. Dr. Constance smiled gently. The State Department will cover travel expenses if you'd like to meet her. Consider it part of the authentication process, gathering oral histories. Neil looked at the photograph and saw decades of loss and survival etched in Katerina's face. She'd known Desmond in ways Neil never had. She could tell them who he really was, beyond the journals and the artifacts and the legacy of complications. We'd like that, he said. Very much. That evening, Neil and Bridget walked down to the yacht one last time before it was sealed as evidence. The specialists had finished their work for the day. In the fading light, the Meridian looked naked, stripped of its secrets, just old wood and brass and faded dreams. They stood on the deck where they'd worked together, where they'd rediscovered each other while uncovering Desmond's past. Mom would have loved this, Bridget said quietly. The mystery, the history, all of it. She would have loved watching you, Neil said. Seeing you be brave, seeing you choose what's right over what's easy. I learned that from both of you. She leaned against the rail. Dad, I've been thinking. When we get the money, if we get it, I want to use part of it to help Silas. Not $3 million, but enough to save his house. He kept this place safe for 40 years. That should mean something. I was thinking the same thing, and I want to create a scholarship, in Mom's name, for art students who want to study cultural preservation. Something good that comes from all this. Neil's throat tightened. Your mother would love that. They watched the sun set over the inlet, painting the water gold and crimson. Somewhere behind them, Silas was in his shed, probably wondering how his life had led him here. Somewhere in Vienna, an old woman was looking at a photograph of the man she'd loved and lost. Somewhere in museums and synagogues and private collections, artifacts were being prepared to return home. And here, on a rusted yacht that had kept its secrets for 40 years, a father and daughter stood together, having found something more valuable than gold or art or any treasure hidden beneath floorboards. They'd found each other again. They'd found purpose. They'd found a way to honor the past while building something new. "Thank you," Neil said. "For what?" "For giving me another chance. For not giving up on me when I gave up on myself." Bridget took his hand. "That's what family does. We keep showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." As darkness fell over Crescent Inlet, they walked back to shore together, leaving the Meridian's call to its memories, carrying their own forward into whatever came next. 6 months later, Neil stood in a small gallery in Prague, surrounded by people speaking languages he didn't understand, looking at a painting that had been hidden in his uncle's yacht for 40 years. The restored piece glowed under museum lighting, bold colors and angular shapes that spoke of rebellion and hope in an era of suppression. Beside him, Bridget photographed everything with her new camera, the expensive kind that serious photographers used. She'd enrolled in a graduate program for documentary photography, focusing on cultural preservation stories. Her thesis project was already taking shape, the journey of Desmond's artifacts from hiding to homecoming. The ceremony was smaller than Neil had expected. The Czech Minister of Culture gave brief remarks about the importance of recovering lost heritage. Dr. Constance spoke about international cooperation. And then they invited Neil to say a few words. He approached the microphone nervously, acutely aware that he was speaking for a man he'd barely known, representing a legacy he was still trying to understand. "My Uncle Desmond was complicated," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. He broke laws. He smuggled artifacts across borders. He lived in moral gray areas that most of us avoid. But he also saved pieces of culture that were meant to be destroyed. He helped people escape persecution, and in the end, he couldn't live with the guilt of profiting from desperation. So he left everything hidden, hoping someone would finish what he couldn't. He paused, looking at the painting. "I think Desmond believed that some things matter more than laws or profits or personal safety. Art matters. Memory matters. The human impulse to create and preserve beauty, even in darkness, especially in darkness, that matters most of all. We're honored to help return these pieces to where they belong. My uncle would be grateful, and I hope, wherever he is, he's found peace." The applause was warm. Afterward, people approached to shake his hand, to share stories about the artists whose work had been recovered, to express gratitude that felt both too much and exactly right. But the moment Neil had been waiting for came when an elderly woman with silver hair approached, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Her son, middle-aged now with his mother's dark eyes, supported her elbow. "Mr. Garrison," her English was accented but clear, "I am Katarina Svoboda." Neil had imagined this meeting for months, but nothing prepared him for the emotion of actually standing before someone his uncle had loved. "Mrs. Svoboda, thank you for coming. Thank you for finding what Desmond saved." She touched his arm gently. "May we speak?" "Privately?" They found a quiet corner, while Bridget stayed with Katarina's son, trading stories about their respective parents. Katarina lowered herself carefully into a chair, and Neil sat across from her. "Desmond was a good man," she said simply. "Complicated, yes. Troubled, yes. But good in the ways that matter. He helped my son and me escape in 1968 during the Prague Spring. My husband was in prison. Desmond got us to Austria, gave us money to start over. He asked for nothing. The journals mention you," Neil said. "He cared about you very much, and I him. But I could not leave my husband, even imprisoned. And Desmond understood. He never asked me to choose." Her eyes were distant with memory. "After my husband was released, after we rebuilt our lives, I tried to find Desmond, to thank him properly. But he had disappeared. I learned only recently that he died in 1979. I carried gratitude for 50 years with no one to give it to. He carried love for you the same way, Neil said gently. I found letters he wrote but never sent. You were in his thoughts until the end. Katerina wiped her eyes. That brings me comfort. Thank you for telling me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. I have something for you. Desmond gave this to me the last time I saw him. He said, if I don't make it back, keep this for me. Remember that some things are worth the risk. Neil unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a compass, brass, elegant, engraved with coordinates. Not the Cyrillic compass they'd found on the yacht, but a Western one, clearly expensive, clearly meaningful. The coordinates, Katerina said, pointing to the engraving, they're for Crescent Inlet, where his yacht was. I never knew what they meant until I heard about your discovery. He was already planning to go home, planning to finish what he'd started. He just ran out of time. Neil turned the compass in his hands, feeling the weight of his uncle's intentions. Desmond had wanted to come home, wanted to make things right. The man who died alone had been trying to find his way back to family. Thank you, Neil said, his voice thick. This means everything. They talked for another hour, Katerina sharing stories about Desmond's kindness, his humor, his moments of doubt and courage. She painted a picture of a man more complete than any journal could capture. A man who made mistakes but never stopped trying to be better. When they finally parted, Katerina embraced him. Finish his work, she whispered. He would be so proud that his family did what he could not. That evening, Neil and Bridget walked along the Vltava River, watching lights reflect on the water. They'd spent the day immersed in history, but now it was just the two of them, father and daughter, processing everything. I start my program next month, Bridget said. I'm nervous. You'll be brilliant. What about you? What's next? Neil smiled. I've been offered a position teaching woodworking at the community college. Full-time, benefits, actual reasonable hours. I accepted yesterday. Dad, that's wonderful. And I've been talking to Silas. He's interested in helping restore the Meridian. The Maritime Museum in Seattle wants to display her, tell Desmond's story properly. Silas knows her better than anyone. He deserves to be part of bringing her back. They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from really knowing someone, from having weathered storms together and come out stronger. Mom would be proud of us, Bridget said finally. She would. Neil touched the ring he still wore under his shirt, but it didn't hurt anymore. I think she'd say we finally figured out what matters. What's that? Showing up. Being honest. Finishing what needs finishing, even when it's hard. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. And never letting pride or fear matter more than the people we love. Bridget leaned into him. That's a pretty good legacy. It's the only one worth leaving. As they walked back toward their hotel, Neil thought about all the legacies intersecting in this moment. Desmond's complicated redemption, Lorraine's enduring love, the artists whose work had survived persecution, the families reunited with treasures they thought lost forever. But the legacy that mattered most was the one he and Bridget were building together, not hidden in compartments or buried in guilt, but lived openly, honestly, with courage inherited from the people who'd come before and wisdom earned from their own journey through grief toward healing. Sometimes life hands you one last chance when you least expect it. The key is recognizing it, taking it, and having the courage to see it through. Neil Garrison had found his last chance in a rusted yacht and a daughter who hadn't given up on him. And together they discovered that the greatest treasure isn't what you inherit, but what you choose to do with it.